Welcome to Tramlines, a podcast from Agri. I'm your host, Tony Smith, putting your questions to the experts. Today we're going to be talking with Will Evans, who was the chair of the 2024 Oxford Farming Conference. We're going to be asking Will about the key theme at this year's conference, the power of diversity. And what does that mean? And what are the key challenges for our people, our farm businesses, and the wider industry? Good morning, Will, and a very warm welcome to Tramlines. Now, before we start talking about Oxford Farming Conference itself, perhaps you could share a little bit about you and your farming background.
Yeah, I'm a multi-generational farmer near Wrexham in North Wales. We farm about 5 miles from Wrexham, little village called Bangrondy. If any horse racing fans out there, we're right by the racecourse. 2 farms and the River Dee runs through the two, so which is a blessing and a curse. Very fertile, free draining land, but as everybody knows, it's been a wet winter and we've had a lot of flooding, which I try not to think about too much. But I farm in partnership with my parents, and I live on the farm with my wife and 4 young daughters. Mixed farm, beef cattle and arable crops. We buy in a lot of calves from neighbouring dairy farms, take them through to fattening. Try not to buy in any feed. We try and keep it quite a circular system, and it works generally quite well.
And how did you get involved in the Oxford Farming Conference?
I got asked a few years ago, I guess 6-7 years ago now, would you like to be part of the OFC Inspire program or apply for it, or was the Emerging Leaders program as it was known then? And I said, what is the Oxford Farming Conference? Never heard of it. Just not on my radar. I was just sort of dipping my toe into the water with doing a few kind of wider industry things. I'd started doing my own podcast called Rock and Roll Farming, and I was just sort of trying at that time to showcase some of the human stories behind farming and food production. And I guess that's why I came onto one of the directors' radar, Matt Naylor. Lashed in an application, didn't think much of it, and suddenly I was on my way to the Oxford Farming Conference with a huge case of imposter syndrome. I met this incredible group of people as part of my course, and just massively opened my eyes to what's out there in terms of farming and food production, and all these very inspiring people who are doing awesome things with their businesses and very different sectors, and obviously got to know those very well. And the nice thing was, of course, I realized that they also arrived with feeling that same sense of imposter syndrome, and that was a bit of a penny drop moment for me.
And it's so easy to assume that everyone knows about the Oxford Farming Conference, but perhaps you could share a little bit about, well, what is it? And I know it's got quite a history. Tell us more, Will.
Yeah, the conference itself, it was started in 1936 by group of farmers in Oxfordshire at that time. A lot of huge strides forward being taken in farming in the 1930s, in terms of mechanisation and food production. And they teamed up with a group of academics at Oxford University and sort of, why do we have this conference? And when you look back at it, actually, and I've read a lot about the history of it because I'm a bit nerdy about farming history, and you look at the early themes of the conference and what they were talking about then, it's not that much different to what we're talking about now. How do you compete with all these emerging markets and imports? And they were short of labour then, and obviously in the midst of a depression, and really interesting. A lot of talk about soil fertility, diversity, and in terms of businesses. So yeah, some things change and some don't.
Very interesting, Will. And so how did you come up with your theme for this year's conference?
Yeah, so we have a different theme every year because, farming is food production is such a massive subject. If you didn't, it might feel all a bit fragmented. And end of the day, the conference is kind of 2 days. So, it's hard to cover everything. So we have a theme and it just sort of keeps us a little bit focused. So themes over the last few years have been Roots to Resilience, looking at the future of family farms. Last year it was more about again the future and technology, and this year I was kind of thinking about it, and I'd had a conversation with our Inspire group at the time. I was last year I was leading on the Inspire program. I was working with these sort of very bright and energetic young people, and we were talking about the labor crisis, how we get people into the industry from different backgrounds, how we get a workforce that reflects the wider society in Britain. We all know farming isn't particularly diverse, although I think we've made quite big strides over the last few years. Certainly in terms of women in farming. And anyway, when I think back to when I was at Harper Adams over 20 years ago, there was about 3 women on my course, and I believe now on all the agricultural courses around the country, there's more women than men. And if you look at the veterinary sector, when I was growing up, all the vets were men. Now there's a lot more women vets. So it changes, but I think there's a lot more to work to do. And you've got to look at why diversity is important as well. We've got quite a diverse board at the conference, and what that does is it gives us a lot of different ideas. It makes it quite an exciting place because people come from different backgrounds and different sectors and different ages and men and women and different skin colors. We don't all think the same, and that makes this a very sort of vibrant and exciting place to work. And I guess that's why I think the conference has been successful this year. But the theme itself, I just wanted to I just felt it was very timely. Look, every farm business I know is short staffed at the moment, and I think a lot of us are quite frustrated by how farming is seen in wider society. I think there's a lot of people who still think it's a thing that people can't do if they're not clever enough to do anything else. And as a very proud farmer, I find that very frustrating. It's a very exciting time to be in farming, despite all the challenges. And there are a lot of challenges, and we debated those at the conference. But at the same time, I think we have to look at those with positivity, and we have to face up to those challenges. And that's why we came up with a theme. So we wanted it to be, at the end of the day, people come to the conference, they pay a lot of money to be there, and we want them to go away, yes, focused on those challenges, but excited and feeling up for the challenge. And that's why we came up with that theme. Really, it was a way of, looking at all those challenges around people, but also we could expand it to diversity of cropping, diversity of livestock breeds, diversification. Many of us in farming obviously looking to diversify our businesses. It's really, really important. And when you start looking into it, there's some incredibly inspiring businesses around the country now, based on farms. And diversity of genetics and diversity of a million other things as well. The planet, biodiversity, and suddenly when we started thinking about it, it all just got quite exciting. And I mentioned this sort of vague idea I had to the rest of the OFC board, and everybody just sort of bought into it straight away. And when we announced the theme publicly, everybody just got on board with it. And this year at the conference, it was a really diverse audience, and it was very exciting. I kept just stopping and looking around and seeing this very diverse group of people laughing and engaging and conversing together. And the feedback after the conference has been unanimously positive. And I think I'm sure we got a lot of things wrong, but I do feel like we got the majority of things right, and that's been very pleasing.
And in terms of from your theme, Will, can you give us an example of one of the talks or presentations that was shared at the conference that really inspired those that were listening to it?
In our Inspiring Farmers session, David Monaka, who's originally from Zimbabwe, he came to the country 20, 30 years ago and identified he wanted to look at some of the crops he was growing that he grew up eating back home in Zimbabwe. White maize is one. He just couldn't get it in the UK. So what did he do? He started growing it and he started selling it in London out the boot of his car. And now he's got a farm in Cambridgeshire, Cambridgeshire County Council farm, pretty sizable unit, and he's grown all these incredible crops there, and massively engaging in North London, educating people as well about where their food comes from. I mean, if you're going to ask me about inspiring, I think that's pretty cool. That's someone who just came in from a different background with different ideas and made it happen, and we all listened to that talk and we all like went away thinking, well, oh my God, that's the very definition of inspiring, isn't it? So yeah, there was a lot of speakers like that.
To listen to the opening speech given by Will Evans as chair of this year's Oxford Farming Conference held in January 2024, and to find links to other papers and videos, visit ofc.org.uk. So, Will, can this power of diversity attract more people into our industry?
Can diversity fix farming's recruitment? I think it can have a big part to play. There is a whole element. I have 4 young daughters. My eldest is now a teenager. My next eldest is nearly a teenager. They're thinking about the world in a really different way than we are. They're all very climate aware. They're very environment aware. They're looking for meaning in their lives. They've grown up with screens. A lot of them want to work in the environment. They feel like they want to play their part in the fight against climate change. And why can't that be in farming? We all know that farming has a huge impact to play. We're all on the front line in that regard. So if some of those people who've never even thought about being in farming, and there's a lot of organizations in food and farming who are doing work in this area, why can't they go into farming and bring those ideas and fresh enthusiasm with them?
And what you say there, Will, makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Thinking about the farm business itself, farmers have faced a very difficult autumn and winter, and coming into this spring are facing difficult challenges. What was the Oxford Farming Conference's thoughts when it comes to helping to build greater farm resilience? And what does that mean as well?
I think we all know the reasons why we need more resilient businesses. Climate change. I mean, half my farm's been underwater several times this winter. I'm now really having to think about whether I can keep growing cereals on some of our land, whether I'm going to have to look at alternative land uses, whether I'm going to have to plant some trees on it. I can't keep sustaining crop losses on that. But it's not just that, it's government support systems are changing, as we all know, direct payments being phased out, environmental payments being phased in, and there are opportunities there. I think the monoculture is dying. Going back again, we know when I grew up, the arable farmers I met at Harper Adams in the 90s, they were all growing a grand rotation of wheat and oilseed rape, constantly. That's changing. You've only got to look in the farming press and see the kind of farmers who are winning awards around the country. They're doing such innovative things with bi-cropping and different all kinds of different crops. I think that's really, really exciting, and trying to cut their nitrogen use down with legumes and lots of different livestock breeds. Again, when I was growing up, it was all continental, size and weight and continental breeds, and now there's been a big resurgence in native livestock breeds who are perhaps better adapted to adapt to a changing climate in the UK. So I think that change of business and business diversity is important. A lot of great farm tourism businesses who sprang up over the last few years and did very well at times of COVID. But as you mentioned as well, supply chains. We launched our report at the conference this year, which was put together. No credit to me whatsoever. It was put together by my amazing colleague Ali Kappa, who most people in farming will have heard of. Ali's a remarkable woman, incredibly talented. She's chair of the NFU horticulture board. And hops and apple grower in Herefordshire, and she'd be as frustrated as anyone at dealing with the supermarkets. And we all know it's very easy to sort of portray supermarkets as this sort of big evil in farming, and I think perhaps we're maybe a little bit lazy with that sometimes. I think at the end of the day, we do have to work with them, and we have to look at our own businesses. However, and what we can improve. However, I think at the moment it does feel desperately skewed, and a lot of farmers who are selling to supermarkets with the cost of massive rising input costs over the last few years just feel in a pretty desperate situation. So we looked at that with a report. It's a very, very impactful document. It's available online. I'd encourage anyone to read it. It was put together by Ali and Jed Futter, who's a brilliantly talented guy. He's done a super job with it. He's a former supermarket buyer, retail expert with many years of experience, and he's put together a very, very impactful and powerful document looking at what could happen if we tried to improve and diversify supply chains, but also what can happen if we don't do that, and the very real impact it's going to have, especially on fruit and vegetable sector, but also on eggs and every other sector in farming. It's if things don't change, it could get very serious very quickly, I think, in terms of empty shelves at the supermarkets.
And that's going to need a lot of open discussion to find a way through. Listening to others is going to be important, isn't it, Will?
We live in quite divided times, at the moment. Social media, echo chambers, seems like a lot of anger, a conflict around the world, populist politicians who just kind of tell us what we want to hear. And that, I think, fuels a lot of division. And I really wanted this conference to be a celebration of difference, so people could come. It was a safe space, air your views, and let's have let's talk positively and try and find a way forward together. And I'm quite proud of the fact that we wanted to do that, and I think we succeeded.
And so, following this year's Oxford Farming Conference, what would be the 2 key areas that you would urge people to take away and consider more deeply that could help to make a difference?
So, number one, and one thing I haven't mentioned, is that, as I say, I'm from a very working farming background, so I spend a lot of time in livestock markets. I speak to a lot of farmers, speak to my neighbours and my friends. They're all farmers, and it's difficult at the moment. It's really tough. It's one of the toughest times I've known. I've spoke to farmer friends of mine over the last year who left school when I did. They were always going to be farmers. That's all they've ever wanted to do, and they are now, thanks to varying things, TB and fall in profit margins, they're now really wondering whether they can keep doing it, and they're wondering whether they would want their children to do it, and I think that's very sad. And so the first thing is that you're not on your own with that. And one of the things I didn't mention with the conference, and one of the reasons why I now, as someone who'd never been to a conference until 2018, I like going to these things. I like going to conferences. I like going to agricultural shows in the summer, because you talk to other people, and ultimately you have those conversations. Not always at the conference. Sometimes it's in over the bar at night or over dinner, and you realize you're not on your own. Just sharing that sometimes, I think, is quite important from a mental health point of view. So there's that. And the other thing is, and I mentioned this at the end of conference in my closing, what you call it, closing speech, closing address. I don't know what it is. This thing I have to do as a chairman. And after the conference, and we heard a lot, it was very sort of positive. And as I've talked, a lot of it was about bringing people together. How do we work together how do we collaborate? How do we try to do this all together? You can't do that on your own. You can't change the world on your own. You can't change things massively on your own. But what you can do is you can change small things. So you can change little things in your life, whether that be to make yourself mentally more resilient, as I've just alluded to, whether you're just sort of trying to keep yourself a bit physically fitter, whether you're just trying to declutter your mind a little bit, in look after your well-being, which then makes yourself a better farmer and person to be around with your family, and a better businessman. But also, how can we do those positive things on our farm in terms of the environment? Maybe it's just, I've spent this weekend on Saturday. I had a brilliant day. Me and my 10-year-old daughter just planted 450 hawthorn quicks in some gaps on the hedge on the farm in hedges. Very sort of easy win. We're not. I'm sure we could be doing a lot more, but that was just a really fun, enjoyable thing that we're doing. And I said, my daughter is 10 and has, I was able to say to her, well, this is a really cool thing for you to be doing for the environment. If you can all keep making those little changes as well, then maybe that'll help. So I hope that doesn't sound grander than I intended to. It's just a little thing we did, but it was fun. So yeah, just those little tiny changes that we can all do can hopefully add up to something bigger.
Thank you, Will, for sharing your insight into the key theme from this year's Oxford Farming Conference, which was the power of diversity. That's it for this podcast, but do tune in again as we meet the experts throughout the season, exploring the many immediate and longer-term questions for growers and farmers in the UK. If you have any questions that you would like us to ask the experts, email info@agri.co.uk. See you next time.